Hello, this is Doug Brown, Executive Director of the Connecticut Bar Association. We're here today on location at the Connecticut Convention Center, the site of the Connecticut Legal Conference and CBA Annual Meeting 2015. I'm here with Karen DeMeola. Hi, Karen.
Hi, Doug.
Karen is the Assistant Dean of Students at UConn Law, and on July 1 of 2015, she will become the Vice President of the Connecticut Bar Association. So, welcome.
Thank you very much, Doug. It's great to be here.
Thank you for being here. You just got done with a program on talking about millennials.
Yes.
And millennials in the workplace and lawyers. And it's an interesting generation.
It is.
Those people born from 1980 to 1995, so it's a pretty big gap. And we've heard talk about how the millennial generation is different. And they're just starting to be of the age where we're going to employ them in our law firms and in our offices. So from your perspective, and you've seen them in law school for some time now, how are the millennial generation different? What should our members expect when they're starting to say, look, I need to hire a really young person to work with me?
Sure. It's fascinating because they are the digital natives, right? They grew up with technology, multi-person games, gaming in their homes, where, I, as a Gen Xer, was sitting in my living room by myself with a console. So they're used to connecting globally. They're used to connecting through technology, through email, through text messaging. This is where we're seeing a lot of differences because a lot of these students, my prospective students, hopefully new attorneys, they're going to expect that there's technology within law firms, in their companies, in their organizations. And so to be technologically sound makes a lot of sense.
So if I'm a member, I say, well, I'm technologically savvy. I have email. Is that what they're talking about?
No.
So what do they mean? What do they mean?
So you have to be active on social media. Apparently Facebook is no longer popular. So if you're not Snapchatting and tweeting and having a Tumblr account, you're apparently a Gen Xer or someone in the baby boomer generation. So it's really important to stay on top of things. Now, I will admit that it's a very difficult piece to swallow. I consider myself generally technologically okay with Facebook and Twitter. But in order to connect with this generation, I found that even in my role at the law school, that I need to look beyond those typical things. Email's not enough. People have my cell phone, they connect with me via text messaging, and that's a very different world. And certainly the tail end of the millennial generation, because I think that's where we are at the moment, they're very much into even more instantaneous communication. So that 24-hour turnaround time rule you might have with email is not necessarily enough. So figuring out ways to communicate within generations and among generations is a really important key for any organization.
So when I've talked with members, they'll say things like, well, those online relationships aren't real relationships. And for many people, they're not.
Right.
But for millennials, it's different, isn't it?
Sure. They've connected through social media, through text messaging forever. This is something that's true to them. They have their relationships sometimes start online.
Does this mean they have problems in face-to-face networking or even picking up the phone to talk to someone?
We have certainly had our challenges with some face-to-face. It's not that they're adverse to sitting down and talking to somebody, but it is a learning experience. It's not typical that people sit in a room anymore. They may be sitting in the same room, but they're text messaging. Or they're communicating on social media. But it doesn't mean that they're not going to be able to come in and have an interview and perform well in an interview or to be a good employee. I think it's just a different way of communicating. Something that's just much more innate to them is to be connected to that phone or connected to their iPad.
So here we are, we have a generation coming that believes in social media, and the older generation knows that some may know that it's important, think Facebook is new.
Sure.
What implications does that have for trying to manage someone who's coming in with those expectations, and where a manager or a lawyer may say, well, I don't even care about Snapchat or any of these other technologies. As somebody who's going to hire them, what do they have to know?
Yeah. So it's about adaptability, I think, and really knowing what you're getting and knowing what you're getting into on the millennial side. I think that millennials are not, their heads are not necessarily in the sand. They know that employers are not necessarily at the same place in terms of technology, but I think millennials bring that to the organization. They bring their knowledge of social media because it's not necessarily about sort of how do we function as employers and an employee, but how does that firm become more relevant to that individual? How do you attract millennials? How do you bring the next generation after millennials in? How do we keep them in our organizations? And through technology, that's a nice way to get those millennials interested in your organization. And they could bring a lot. They could value add for the organization. Now, of course, there are ethical guidelines and rules around social media and such, but it is another way to communicate, another way to reach potential clients and potential employees.
So aside from technology, in terms of value system, and I know in traditional environment, you make an investment in an associate, you bring an associate up, you spend a year getting them trained, and they're really only profitable and productive in year 2 and year 3.
Right.
And we've talked before that's not what they're looking for. What are they looking for when they talk about what are the advancement opportunities at your firm?
Right. So it's no longer about the job, it's about job opportunities.
Okay.
So typically you'd see someone go into an organization, a firm or business, and they'd be there for the long haul. They'd plan on retiring there. That's no longer the case with this generation. Millennials are really looking at how are you as an organization going to benefit me in terms of my overall career goals. It is not uncommon for employers to hear at an informational interview or an interview for a position, what are my opportunities here? And yes, on the one hand, sure, you want to know that you can grow professionally, you want to know what the structure is in terms of associates and how long it takes to become a partner, but it's a little different. The framing of that question now is, so what are you going to do for me? Which is interesting, right? It's very different. I mean, I think we were all saying that when we were fresh out of law school.
Your employer, what are you going to do for me?
No. No, and we could talk another time about how lots of people don't even negotiate salaries. This crew is absolutely ready to do that, right?
Really?
They have their best interest forward. This is a generation who saw their parents' retirement funds get completely wiped out when the economy crashed. Their parents lost their jobs. The trust in institutions being stable and long-term is gone. Because they saw their parents and their grandparents lose their jobs, companies closed, and people were fired. And that impacts a generation.
The majority of our members are reasonably small firms. They're not large organizations. We were grateful to have all of our 100% club members, but the average member might just have a paralegal and a couple of other people, and so they might really struggle with what are the advancement opportunities. And they also might struggle with this distrust issue because they take it really personally.
Right.
It's one thing to say, I don't trust, General Electric. Another to say, I don't trust you as a person.
Right.
How would somebody deal with that in terms of establishing that rapport, that trust with someone who really views the world so differently than they do?
Sure. And I think it is a relationship. I think that a lot of what we do is relationship building. And I think instead of looking at it as, I'm going to hire this associate, I'm going to train this associate in a small firm, and perhaps one day this person will be partner, and we'll grow a firm, maybe I'll hand it over. It's about what can we give each other today? What are we learning? What can I show this young attorney that's going to make him or her successful? How can they make us more successful as a small firm? How can they help us grow our business? Maybe it is about technology for some people. Maybe it is about reaching a new market, getting a niche that makes sense as we move forward in terms of looking at how the practice of law is changing.
Sure. So that makes the idea of mentoring and establishing that personal connection with that employee even more important, doesn't it?
Absolutely. And that's changed. We talk about great generalizations about generations, but it's changed from the early millennials to now, where early millennials were not necessarily interested in that coaching and that mentoring. But the tail end, they certainly are. They're very much interested in talking to anyone they can about how they can be successful as attorneys, how could they be successful in the business, and so that mentoring and that coaching is absolutely important, and they need that.
What have you seen in terms of work ethic? Because that's one of the things we hear about millennials is that they don't want to work.
Right.
And that's a terrible generalization for people born over a 15-year time span.
That's right.
But what have you seen?
So we've seen something very different. It's all about flex hours.
Flex hours.
Yeah. So, and that doesn't necessarily mean I'm going to work from 7 to 3 because I have to pick up my kids. But sometimes it's I cannot work in the morning, so I need to have some flexibility where I might work from 10 to 7, 10 to 8. it's not that they're not going to get the work done. It's not they're not hardworking, because they are hardworking. It's just that the typical 9-to-5 schedule does not necessarily fit their lifestyle.
I can see that being a challenge for members, not just on the principle of it, but on there's a time that clients expect you to be available. There's a time your coworkers need you to be available. So you're saying that's going to have to shift as we go through time?
I think that we need to look at how we do business, right? I think that if there are times that employees need to be in the office, obviously they need to be there to meet with clients, to meet with partners, to meet with associates, to work collaboratively. This generation loves working collaboratively. So if it's pitched as a team effort, they're gonna buy in. And again, generalizations.
Sure.
But I think really taking a look at, are we working in a clock in, clock out system, billable hours aside, and can we allow our employees to have more flexibility? Is it okay when there's no client meetings for that person to work at home because they prefer a quiet space, or to come in and stay until 7 or 8 o'clock at night?
It's an interesting dynamic where you're saying that this generation doesn't really trust the employer, but doing what you say requires pretty significant trust from the employer back to that employee.
That's right.
Because a lot of our, we grew up on a clock. If you weren't present, you weren't working.
That's right. And as a Gen Xer, yes. We go in, we first to leave, first in, last out. Right? That's what we're used to. And it's different, right? It's very different to get used to, even on the educational side. When students are emailing at 3 o'clock in the morning because that's their biorhythm.
Wow.
And they expect an answer. I mean, that's just not happening.
So they're expecting an answer right this second.
Right this second. Some of them, yes.
How does that fit we're a knowledge business. What about the time to think?
Yeah, they think all the time.
They're thinking all the time.
So and they just think at different hours.
Short feedback quickly than no feedback for a while.
That's right. That's why text messaging goes up and emails go down a little.
Interesting.
Depending on the time
So
of
what
year.
kind of things are you able to do at UConn Law that are helping millennials be able to try to adapt more to those who have the jobs? Because we have this, we should adapt to them.
That's right.
Yet they also need the job. So how are you able to help students learn to adapt to the environment they're entering?
We do a lot of professional development. And a lot of that starts on day one at orientation, right? You're entering a profession. There's a professional code of conduct, right through to, this is how you interview. This is what's expected of you when you go into a job. This is a generation who has received a prize for everything that they've ever done.
They get a sticker for doing their job.
That's right. And sort of letting them know that is not the real world. You're not necessarily going to get the certificate of completion for attending a class. You actually have to earn your way.
Right.
And so training students about generational issues. We've brought in experts on, like you did today, experts on generational issues, especially in the workplace. Yeah. And training them about what it is to be an attorney, what it is to be a professional. How do you comport yourself? When's the right time to ask about the partnership ladder? How do you communicate?
Not the informational interview, right?
Right. How do you communicate? How do you communicate with a senior partner, an associate? When is it okay to text message? When is it okay to Facebook friend somebody? How appropriate is it to send a video, of you at a family party, and put that on Facebook? So we have a lot of conversations with students about how to comport themselves in a professional environment. And it does mean that some people have to change the way that they operate on Facebook or Twitter or Tumblr or wherever they're posting these days.
Yeah, it's probably not that unlike other generational shifts when Gen X came up from the baby boom, except everything seems faster with technology now.
Oh, that's absolutely right.
Much more public than
right.
You could make a mistake and people might not know before. Now it's broadcast to the whole world.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, so. And they know information quickly. If they don't know something, they just look it up on Google on their phone and they could be an expert in 5 minutes.
That's right. In their own minds.
In their own minds, yeah.
So this is a really important topic, really important generation. We tend to think of as you said, the new millennials born in the 90s as, it's kind of the generation, but it goes all the way back to 1980. So there's a lot of people there. And as you pointed out in our conversations, those who were born in the first part of that generation are going to have different characteristics than those who are just coming out of college now.
That's right. That's right.
So if you had a piece of advice to share with our membership, on this topic as a closing thought, what would that be?
I think that's very important to build those relationships, to have conversations, to think about the value added on both sides. That is not a one-way street. Employers don't all need to adapt and change their ways immediately to bring in the millennials.
Sure.
And millennials, they need to adapt as well, right? They need to learn some skills that will allow them to be successful in a multi-generational office and allow them to succeed as attorneys. You know, we want young attorneys to be successful. Right now, it's like 35% of the workforce is a millennial generation.
Yep.
They've overtaken the baby boomers officially, and they're just going to keep growing. We're going to see more and more of them coming into the workforce.
Well, and that's one of the things that I know we'll be working on together over the next couple of years as we in the Bar Association try to be more, not just diverse, but more inclusive.
That's right.
Of people with all different backgrounds and values, because that's what the future of the practice of law is going to be, and we as an association need to find a way to welcome them into the profession without losing the standards of what the public's come to expect from us. So
that's right.
I'm looking forward to working on that with you.
I am too.
Thanks, Karen.
Thank you so much, Doug.
Thanks.